She always thought he was cold, distant, impossible to love. But when the earthquake trapped them alone in the forest, she discovered a side of him no one had ever seen. And that night, when he wrapped his arms around her to keep her alive, Hana realized the man she feared the most was the one her heart had been waiting for. The morning in the refugee camp began like so many others, dust rising in the dry air, long lines forming in front of the aid tents, and tired voices calling out for help. Hana walked quickly among the injured, clipboard in hand, focused as always. Her ponytail swung with the rhythmic urgency of her steps, and her light brown eyes scanned everything with precision. Jihoon, a few meters ahead, distributed supplies. He looked like a human wall in the middle of the chaos doll, steady, unshakable. The children almost hid behind him when the hot wind blew harder. They saw each other every day, worked side by side, but between them, there was silence. The relationship had always been professional, cold, maybe even tense. Hana thought Jihoon was too rigid. Jihoon thought Hana was too distant. And yet their paths crossed. Always. Unit 4. I need more gauze pads, Hana called, without even looking at him. Jihoon handed over the kit quickly. Here, be careful, the line's getting intense, he said, serious. She nodded, with no time for anything else. But for a moment his eyes followed the movement of her hand shaking from exhaustion. He noticed before she did that she was worn out. He wanted to say something, but he didn't. There was no time. In the afternoon, the ground began to tremble. A deep rumble moved beneath the soil, like something hidden under the earth let out a roar. People looked around, confused. Dust rose into thick clouds. Earthquake, someone shouted. Hana dropped her clipboard on the ground. Patients began running. Metal structures shook violently. Jihoon ran toward her without thinking. Hana, get out of the tent. Now, she tried to help a mother with 2 children, but Jihoon grabbed her arm and pulled her out just before the structure collapsed. I needed to help, Hana protested, breathless. You can't help anyone if you're dead, he shot back, firm. Another tremor, stronger. The ground opened in small cracks, and the dust was so dense it was difficult to see ahead. A siren sounded across the camp, but the third wave of shaking knocked down part of the side fence. Patients and volunteers ran in every direction. A group of refugees started to scatter in panic toward the nearby forest. No, come back, Hana yelled, running after them. Jihoon saw the direction she went, and his heart sank. Hana, don't go toward the ravine, she didn't hear, or heard too late. Jihoon sprinted after her, dust slicing across his vision, his heart pounding against his ribs. She tried to reach a small girl who was running in terror, but the ground beneath Hana's feet sank with the latest tremor. Hana, Jihoon shouted. He lunged forward, grabbing her hand at the exact moment the ground gave way. For a second, he thought he would lose his balance too, but he pulled with all the strength he had. The ground trembled again, the world spun, and both of them slipped down the slope. During the fall, there was only one sound. Jihoon. I'm here. The descent was short but violent. Dust swallowed everything. Branches scraped their arms. Stones hit their bodies. When they finally stopped, they were in a narrow clearing surrounded by dense trees. The path above, completely blocked by the landslide. The refugee camp now seemed miles away. Hana tried to stand but staggered. Jihoon caught her by the shoulders. Are you hurt? Just scared, she replied, breathing fast. He quickly analyzed their surroundings. We can't climb that. We need to find another way out. Hana looked around, her heart racing. It was the first time she had seen Jihoon this close without his professional armor. He was breathless, covered in dust. His hair messy and falling into his eyes, his shirt torn, revealing his strong shoulder, and his gaze was fixed on her. Are you okay? He asked, his voice much softer than she ever imagined it could be. Hana swallowed hard. I'm fine. I think I am. A heavy silence fell between them, silence that made the air around them feel different. Jihoon drew a deep breath. Hana, we're going to have to survive together here until someone finds us. Something inside her tightened fear, adrenaline, and something else she didn't want to admit. They were alone. In the forest, trapped, dependent on each other, and this was only the beginning. The dust finally began to settle. Hana was breathing fast, trying to understand where they were. Her heart was still pounding so hard it pulsed in her neck. Jihoon remained still for a moment, listening to every sound around them, branches cracking, leaves rustling, the distant echo of new tremors. He was in full protection mode. "Hana," he said, stepping closer to her, "can you walk?" Ah! She tested her left leg, making an involuntary grimace. Jihoon immediately crouched down in front of her, his brow furrowed, his voice deep and gentle at the same time. "Let me see. I'm fine. I just got a little dizzy when we fell." Hana tried to stand up on her own, but her ankle buckled. Jihoon caught her by the waist, held her firmly. Firmly enough that it was clearly more than professional. His touch made Hana hold her breath. Her body almost pressed against his chest warm despite the cold forest air. "Listen to me," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "You got hurt. It's nothing serious. But don't pretend everything is okay." She looked away for a moment, uncomfortable with how icily he could see through her. "I just don't want to be a burden," she murmured. Jihoon lifted her chin with the tip of his fingers, forcing her to face him. "You would never be a burden to me." The words came out too fast, too warm. Hana froze. She saw something different in his eyes, not just concern, something deeper, more intense, something she had never noticed before. Jihoon realized what he had said and looked away, clearing his throat. "I mean, you're part of the team. I have to keep you safe." But his tone didn't match the explanation, or did the way he was still holding her waist. Hana tried to ignore the heat rising up her neck, but she couldn't. "Right then. Let's go, before it gets dark." They advanced a few meters through the dense forest. The vegetation was so thick they could barely see the sky. Giant roots made the terrain uneven. Jihoon walked ahead, using his arms to push branches aside. He looked back every few steps, as if he needed to check that she was still there. "Tell me if you're in pain," he repeated. "I said I'm fine," she answered, firm. He stopped, turned slowly. "Hana, I know that I'm fine. I've seen you say it when you were clearly about to faint." She crossed her arms. "I just don't want you to think I'm weak." Jihoon took one step toward her, very close, close enough for her to smell himwood, light sweat, dust. "You're the strongest person here," he said quietly. "And I noticed that long before we got trapped." Her face warmed instantly. Before she could respond, a new tremor shook the ground. It was quick, but strong enough to knock down branches and make the surrounding trees sway. Hana lost her balance. Before she could fall, Jihoon grabbed her one arm around her waist, the other sliding up her back until he held her firmly against his chest. Her body pressed into his. Her face landed against his shoulder, and Jihoon held his breath sharp and deep. "Hana," he murmured, his voice low and husky. "You're trembling." I don't like earthquakes," she confessed, unable to pull her face away from his chest. His fingers tightened around her waist, stronger, more protective. "I know, I'm here." Until it stops. The tremor ended, but Jihoon didn't let go, and she didn't ask him to. 1 second, 2, 3. They stayed like that far too long for it to be innocent. When they finally stepped apart, both their gazes had changed. Warmer, deeper. Hana looked away, feeling her cheeks burn. Jihoon cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. "We need to find shelter," he said, "before dark. We can't stay exposed." Hana nodded. But as they walked, she felt her heart beating far too fast to blame only the scare. Jihoon was quiet. But the way he kept looking at her always revealed everything he tried to hide. The fear of losing her, the desire to protect her, and a feeling beginning to grow. Dangerous and irresistible. That night, before the rescue teams found them, the two of them would discover something neither ever expected to feel for the other. And the forest, silent and watchful, seemed to know. The forest began to darken faster than Hana and Jihoon expected. The canopy was so dense that the daylight simply disappeared. The cold wind cut through their damp clothes, sending a shiver that didn't come only from the temperature. Hana placed her hand on the trunk of a wide tree, trying to steady her breathing. Her ankle hurt more than she was willing to admit. Jihoon noticed. He always noticed. "Here," he said, touching her arm lightly. "Let's stop for a bit." She shook her head. "No, we need to keep going. If we stop now, The temperature will drop too much. Hana, he interrupted. Serious, I said stop. She lifted her eyes, surprised by the firmness in his tone. It was the kind of look he only used when the situation was genuinely critical. Even so, there was no harshness, only concern. Real concern. Hana swallowed hard. All right, she murmured. Jihoon examined the area and spotted a rocky formation partially covered by the thick roots of a giant fig tree. The inside was dark but dry, and large enough to shelter 2 people. There he pointed. They walked to the natural shelter, and Hana entered first. The air was cold, but at least it was protected from the wind. Jihoon stepped in after her, and the tiny space instantly felt smaller. The air grew warm, dense, charged. He removed his backpack and started checking its contents. We have 2 emergency blankets, he said, pulling out the silver material that reflected the faint light. Not comfortable, but it'll keep us warm enough. Hana sat down slowly, testing her ankle again. Jihoon knelt in front of her, examining the injury with a focus that was almost too intense. Breathe out, he said. I am breathing out. No, you're not. You hold your breath when you're in pain. Hana widened her eyes. He noticed things even she didn't. Jihoon began, flustered. How long have you been watching me that closely? He lifted his eyes and didn't look away. Since long before we got trapped here, her heart skipped a beat. The air seemed to grow warmer. Silence. A silence that said more than any explanation could. Jihoon realized he had said too much and refocused on her ankle. It's not broken, he said. Just twisted. It needs warmth. And rest. He unfolded the emergency blanket and wrapped it gently around her leg. His hands were large, warm, precise. Hana felt her skin shiver when his fingers touched her calf in a slow, careful motion. You're cold, Jihoon murmured, without looking up. It's not just the cold, she admitted before thinking. Jihoon raised his face slowly, a slow movement, measured, as if he feared breaking something he didn't fully understand yet. Hana, he said, his voice so low it nearly became a whisper. Look at me. She tried to glance away, but he held her chin gently, guiding her gaze back to his. You're shaking, he said. And I know it's not just because of the temperature. Hana felt her heart accelerate violently. You're very close, she whispered. I can move away, Jihoon said, though he didn't move an inch. But you don't want to, Hana finished. Jihoon stared at her for long seconds. His breathing grew heavier. His chest rose and fell far too slowly to be casual. No, I don't want to. The words floated in the air like warmth in the cold forest. He sat beside her, but so close their shoulders touched. The blanket was large, but Jihoon pulled it so it covered both of them without asking for permission. Hana felt his body brush against hers, strong, solid, warm. The first night will be difficult, he said. The cold, the darkness, the fear. But you won't face it alone, Jihoon. I'll stay with you. The whole night, her chest tightened. It wasn't just protection. It was something more. Something she couldn't name yet. The wind blew outside, and the temperature dropped suddenly. Hana shivered, and Jihoon instinctively slipped his arm behind her, pulling her closer. Her head rested against his chest. His warmth wrapped around her like an unspoken embrace. Jihoon's heartbeat was too strong. It's far too strong to be just adrenaline. Hana exhaled softly against him, and the warm breath on his neck made Jihoon close his eyes for a moment. Stay like this, he murmured. You're safe. Hana didn't respond. She simply leaned in closer. And there, in the silent darkness, with her body nestled against his, Jihoon understood exactly what had begun, the kind of feeling he had spent years trying to avoid, the kind of feeling Hana had never allowed herself to feel. But now, they were trapped with each other, literally in every sense, and that night would only be the beginning. Night had fallen completely. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees like a distant lament. The small hollow beneath the roots of the giant fig tree was the only shelter they had. Only their breathing filled the space warm, close, inevitable. Hana finally relaxed her body against Jihoon, but her heart was still racing at a dangerous pace. Jihoon noticed everything. Your body's still tense, he murmured, his voice low in the dark. It's not just the cold, Hana admitted, almost inaudible. Jihoon turned his face slightly toward hers. They were so close that the tip of his nose almost brushed her temple. Then tell me what it is. Silence between them was so intense she could hear her own pulse. Hana breathed slowly, as if she were holding too many words inside. I don't know why, but when you hold me like this, the fear goes away, she whispered. But that scares me in a different way. Jihoon closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the impact of her words hit his chest like a soft yet precise blow. Hana, I'm here, he said, and I'm not letting go of you. Not for anything. She swallowed, her face warming. You talk as if... She hesitated, as if I mean more than I should. Jihoon froze. For long seconds. Then his hand slid slowly to her waist, touching the fabric of her clothes with the tips of his fingers. Maybe you do, he finally said. Hana's stomach tightened. The air thickened. The space inside the cave felt even smaller. Jihoon took a deep breath, his voice rough. I won't lie to you, Hana. Not after everything that happened today. She lifted her face slowly until their eyes met in the dim light. He continued, When you fell, when I thought I'd lost you down that slope. Jihoon closed his hand for a second, as if reliving the moment. I felt something I Haven T felt, even on the worst days at the camp. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Hana felt her body react as shiver, climbing her spine and spreading across her shoulders. Jihoon, I know, shouldn't, not now, not here. But I can't pretend that something didn't happen today. She stayed silent, but she didn't pull back. On the contrary, she leaned just a little closer, so little that anyone else might have missed it, but Jihoon felt it like an earthquake. He slowly placed his hand over the side of her ribs, warm through the thin fabric. Hana held her breath. Does it hurt? He asked. No, she answered. It's just you. Jihoon bit the inside of his cheek, trying to maintain the emotional balance he was quickly losing. He leaned closer, slowly, carefully, almost like a silent plea. If I'm crossing a line, tell me now, he murmured, his mouth just centimeters from hers. Hana's chest rose with a trembling breath. You're not crossing anything. Jihoon rested his forehead against hers. They breathed together for a long moment, sharing the same air, the same tension, the same growing heat they had been trying to ignore since they fell into that ravine. Hana, he said, his voice genuinely rough. I need to hold you. Just that. Just hold you, she answered without hesitation. Then hold me. He did. Jihoon carefully pulled her onto his lap, positioning her between his legs, completely enveloping her with his arms in the thermal blanket. Her body molded to his, as if it belonged there. Hana rested her head on his shoulder, her nose brushing the warm skin of his neck. He took a deep breath, so deep that his chest pressed against her back. You're shaking, he murmured. It's not the cold, she admitted for the third time that night. Jihoon slid his hand along her back, slowly, with a tenderness that almost unraveled her from the inside. I know. Hana closed her eyes. His breath touched her ear. His nose brushed her hair. His arm around her tightened, and not out of fear, but out of need. He whispered finally, I want to protect you more than I should. She turned her face to look at him. And Jihoon's eyes were full, warm, completely exposed in a way he had never shown at the camp. Hana felt her heart melt slowly, irresistibly. Jihoon, she called softly. You don't have to pretend with me either. He didn't wait any longer. Slowly, as if the outside world could collapse again at any second, Jihoon leaned in. One sigh from her. 1 second of hesitation from him, and then their lips met. Slow, deep, warm. A kiss born from fear, tension. Pain yet turning into something far more intense than either of them ever expected to feel there. Hana gripped his shirt tightly, pulling him closer. Jihoon let out a low sound into the kiss, so low, only she heard it. His hand slid up her back, pulling her by the waist, bringing her completely into his chest. When they finally parted, their breathing was uneven. Hana rested her forehead on his, trying to catch her breath. I don't know what's happening to me, she confessed. Jihoon cupped her face with both hands. I know exactly what's happening to me, he said. And I promise, I'm not letting anything hurt you. Not here, not outside this place. She closed her eyes, touched, vulnerable. Jihoon, you're with me now, he said, firm, almost possessive, and I'm keeping you safe. all night long. Hana rested her head on his chest again, and he wrapped himself around her as if he were a human shield. And there, trapped in the forest, between roots, cold and darkness, two hearts that had never allowed themselves to feel anything beyond professionalism began to change. And nothing would ever be the same after that night. Dawn had fallen like a weight over the forest. Hana woke with a small start, not from fear, but from the warmth pressed against her body where she rested against Jihoon. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was, and why she was lying on his chest. Hoon's arm was still wrapped around her waist, firm, warm, protective. His chest rose and fell slowly and deeply, like a man who hadn't slept peacefully in a long time. Hana stayed completely still. She studied his face in the dimness, the defined jawline, the small cut on his brow from the fall, the slightly longer hair falling into his eyes, and the way he held her even in his sleep, as if his body already knew she was there. A strange, dangerous feeling spread inside her. Jihoon inhaled deeply and opened his eyes slowly. They were only a few centimeters apart, so close that Hana felt the warmth of his breath brush her lips. "You're awake?" Jihoon murmured, voice rough with sleep. "What?" Yeah," Hana whispered, feeling her face warm. "Sorry, I think I fell asleep on top of you." Jihoon didn't move. He didn't release her waist either. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice low, warm. "I was holding you. I didn't let you go for even a second." She swallowed. Jihoon brushed a strand of hair from her face. "How's your ankle?" Hana tried to move her leg and winced. Jihoon immediately frowned. "Is it worse?" "It's just stiff," she said, trying to minimize it. "Nothing serious." "Hana," he said, meeting her eyes again, steady and firm, "you always say you're fine when you're hurting." She sighed, defeated. "Yeah, I do that." Jihoon touched her ankle gently. "It needs more warmth," he said. "And support." He took the second emergency blanket and opened it. "We'll change how you're sitting," he explained. "Come here. Lean back against my legs. That way I can massage it without you putting weight on it." Hana froze. "Against your legs." Jihoon looked at her with pure practicality. "You need heat and stability. This'll help." Hana felt a shiver run up her spine. Yet she moved closer. He guided her with steady hands until she was sitting between his legs, her back resting against his chest, wrapped entirely within the emergency blanket they now shared. Jihoon's body surrounded her from behind. His warmth seeped through her clothes, making the cold air around them fade away. "Good," he murmured. "Like this." His hands moved to her ankle, massaging it with slow, steady motions. Hana's eyes fluttered shut immediately. "Does it hurt?" Jihoon asked. "No," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "It's warm." Jihoon paused for half a second. Only half. Then he continued, slower. "I'll keep it like this," he murmured, his mouth so close to her ear that her skin trembled, "until you stop shaking." She blinked. "I'm shaking." "You are," he confirmed softly. "Since you woke up. And it's not because of the cold." His hands slid up her calf, warming her skin through the thin fabric. Long strokes, careful ones, but full of a tenderness that made it obvious he was holding back far more than he let on. Hana breathed deeply. "Jihoon, why are you doing this?" Silence. A silence that felt heavy, too heavy for the tight space they shared. Then his hand moved over hers, covering it, warming it, grounding her. "Because I want you well," he said softly, honestly, "and because I need to feel that you're safe. Here, with me." Hana turned her head just enough to look at him. His eyes were so intense they almost made her flinch. Almost. "How long? Were you watching me before today?" she asked. Jihoon leaned forward. "Close. Too close. Since long before this," he said. "Quake. Before we got separated from the camp. Before all of it." Her heartbeat stuttered. "Watching me." "How?" Jihoon touched his forehead to hers. "I watched you be strong. Be steady. Be kind. Even when no one saw it. Even when no one thanked you." Hana felt heat rise in her chests. Low, emotional. "So why didn't you ever say anything?" He gave a small, almost sad smile. "Because you always felt too distant. Untouchable." She inhaled sharply. "I'm not untouchable." Jihoon slid his fingertips along her waist, slow and warm, feeling her react beneath his hands. "I know," he whispered. "I know that now." Silence again. Charged. Dangerous. Jihoon leaned in, his lips brushing her cheek, almost touching, barely holding back. "Hana," he said, voice low and rough, fighting restraint. "If I'm crossing a line." "Tell me now," she answered without hesitation. "You're not." Jihoon exhaled slowly, like those words had finally broken the last barrier he was holding. His hands slid up her waist and pulled her closer against him. Hana turned her face more toward his. Jihoon ran his nose along her cheek. "You take my breath away," he whispered. She closed her eyes. "Then breathe with me," Hana murmured, so gently and so honestly that Jihoon no longer resisted. He turned her face fully with one hand and kissed her, a warm kiss. Deep, slow, one that made the forest, the cold, the entire night disappear around them. Hana turned in his lap, gripping his shirt tightly. Jihoon let out a low sound into her mouth, a rough, raw sound full of everything he had been holding inside for years. His hand slid up her back, pulling her into his chest completely. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. Jihoon rested his forehead against hers. "Hana, you're driving me crazy?" She smiled, breathless. "You're driving me crazy too?" He wrapped his arms tightly around her, pulling her into his chest as if he needed to protect her even from himself. And there, inside the tiny shelter, in the middle of the forest, while the wind howled outside, what had begun as survival was rapidly turning into something impossible to stop, completely impossible to ignore. Morning crept slowly into the forest, and the cold inside the small rocky shelter still lingered stubbornly. Hana remained seated between Jihoon's legs, wrapped in the emergency blanket and surrounded by the warmth of his body. But now, something new was in the air. The feeling of his mouth was still on hers. And Jihoon's breathing, even calm, betrayed that he hadn't forgotten either. Hana shifted slightly, trying to put a little distance between them so she could think clearly. But Jihoon's hand tightened on her waist. Not harshly, just firmly, as if he couldn't help himself. "Does it still hurt?" he asked, glancing at her ankle. "A lot less," Hana answered, but her voice came out softer than she meant. Jihoon noticed. He always noticed. He let her go just enough so she could turn and sit facing him. Even with the space, the shelter was too small, making them sit close, dangerously close. Jihoon ran a hand through his hair, breathed in deeply, then met her eyes. "About what happened," began, tense. Hana cut him off immediately. "Are you regretting it?" Jihoon froze, then shook his head slowly. "No, not at all. I just don't want to pressure you." Hana's heart thumped too fast. His sincerity hit her harder than the cold air. "You didn't pressure me," she murmured, looking down. Jihoon tilted his head, trying to meet her gaze again. "Then why does it feel like you're pulling away?" She inhaled deeply, finally looking into his eyes. "Because everything happened so fast. And I don't know what happens once we're back." Jihoon stayed quiet for a moment. Then he reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers slowly like he was asking permission with every touch. "Hana, this isn't just because we're stuck here. It's not adrenaline. He hesitated, but he didn't back away. "I felt something for you long before this. I just didn't want to disrupt your work or make you uncomfortable." The words hit her deeply. She looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand her own heart. "Jihoon," she whispered, "I didn't think you saw me like that." "I did," he said, with a gentle honesty that made her chest tighten. "I still do." The silence between them wasn't tense. It was warm, full, loaded with something both of them recognized, even if neither had said it yet. A sharp crack from outside made them both lift their heads. Jihoon immediately tensed. "What was that?" Hina asked. He listened again. Another distant metallic sound. Jihoon moved closer to the entrance but stayed inside. He scanned the forest. "Sounds like voices," he said slowly. Hana's heart skipped. "Rescue?" Jihoon breathed out. His expression brightened slightly, but there was a subtle sadness there too. It's like someone who wasn't ready for this moment to arrive so soon. "They're close," he confirmed. "They might find the landslide and follow the path here." Hana stepped closer to him, her fingers brushing his arm unintentionally. So we're getting out? Jihoon turned his hand and held hers. Yeah, we are. But he didn't smile fully, and Hana noticed immediately. Jihoon, he faced her again, his expression soft but filled with something deeper. I don't want you to think that. Once we're back, things go back to how they were, he said. Because for me they don't. Hana's chest tightened. She stepped closer, then closer again, till her breath brushed his neck. For me, they don't go back either, she admitted, this time without hesitation. Jihoon closed his eyes, like someone finally letting himself feel everything he'd been holding back. He cupped her neck gently, pulling her face near his. So, when we're found, you stay with me? He asked quietly, vulnerably. Hana held his face in both hands, meeting his eyes directly. I stay, she whispered. And you? Jihoon smiled. Small smile, but rare, sincere, warm enough to melt through her whole chest. I already stayed, he replied. From the first time you looked at me without noticing, and when the voices of the rescuers finally echoed through the trees, Hana and Jihoon met in a slow, warm kiss full of promise. Because rescuers could take them out of the forest, but nothing would take them away from each other. The voices of the rescue workers echoed through the forest, muffled, as if coming from several meters away. Hana and Jihoon slowly pulled away from the kiss, their foreheads still touching, breathing deeply as if they needed to return to reality. The reality where, theoretically, everything would go back to normal. But between them, nothing was normal anymore. Jihoon slid his thumb across her cheek, brushing away a trace of dust on her skin. Let's get out of here, he said, but his voice carried no urgency. But we're not going back to being strangers at the camp. Hana gave a small, soft smile, her chest tightening in a strangely warm way. I don't want to be a stranger to you either. Jihoon inhaled deeply, almost as if relieved. But then he tensed again when another sound came. Footsteps. Closer this time, snapping branches beneath them. We need to signal them, he said, but without stepping out. The ground might still give way. Hana nodded. Jihoon took off his jacket, dirty, torn, damp, and waved it through the opening of the rocky shelter, extending his arm as far as possible without exposing himself too much. Here, he shouted. We're down here, Eco. Then a response. We're coming. Stay where you are. The voice was strong, clear, human. Hana felt her knees weaken. Jihoon caught her by the waist before she lost balance. Hey, he murmured. You're safe now. She took a shaky breath. Jihoon, thank you. For everything. If you hadn't grabbed me when the hillside crumbled, he placed his hand on the back of her neck. I'd pull you up 1,000 times if I had to. Hana's smile trembled, small and emotional. But the moment was interrupted by the sound of ropes being thrown down from the top of the slope. Silhouette appeared. Then another. 3 rescue workers descended with full gear, helmet lights cutting through the dense vegetation. Jihoon stepped forward first, signaling the safest path. Here, her ankle is twisted. Hana, even trying to stand strong, couldn't hide the slight tremor when she attempted to put weight on her foot. One rescuer approached her. Can you walk? Before Hana could answer, Jihoon said, She can. But I'll carry her if necessary. Hana stared at him, surprised. Jihoon looked back at her as if carrying a woman in his arms for miles was the most natural thing in the world.
Ow.
The rescuer smiled faintly. Let's go slowly. The trail is unstable. Jihoon wrapped an arm around her waist. She leaned into him without hesitation, without fear, without distance. The rescuers noticed. 2 of them exchanged a quick, knowing glance, too obvious to comment on. The path back to safe ground was narrow, wet, full of loose stones. Hana tried her best to stay balanced, but each step sent a fresh ache through her ankle. Jihoon's hand squeezed her waist a little tighter. If it hurts, tell me, he whispered near her ear. Are you going to insist on that the entire way? She asked, trying and failing to hide the smile. I am, Jihoon replied, not even pretending otherwise. Once they reached the wider clearing at the top, a rescuer turned to them. There's a medical team just ahead. But we need to climb this last slope slowly. and one of you goes first. Hana opened her mouth to say she could climb alone. Jihoon didn't let her. I'll go first, he said. Pull the rope once I'm up, the rescuer nodded. Hana's heart tightened as she looked at him. I'll be fine, she said before he could worry too much. Jihoon cupped her face in both hands. You will. It's because I'll be up there waiting for you. The kiss didn't happen, but the look. The look meant more than any touch. Jihoon climbed, fast, precise, strong. When he reached the top, he leaned over the edge. Hana, he called, gripping the rope. Come, I'm right here. And Hana knew in the exact moment she looked up at him. Framed by the gray sky, hand extended, body ready to pull her toward him, that it wasn't just a physical rescue. Jihoon was her safe place, the one place she wanted to fall and be caught. She grabbed the rope. I'm coming, and she climbed toward him. Toward the man who had changed everything, and didn't yet know how much more he would change. The cold wind cut across the improvised camp as Hana was guided toward the medical tent. Jihoon didn't leave her side for a single second. Not when they asked him to wait outside, not when 2 doctors tried to take over. He simply crossed his arms and stayed there, standing like a wall, until they were done. Hana had her ankle wrapped, and when she stepped out of the tent, walking slowly, she saw Jihoon standing, covered in dirt clothes, torn hair messy, watching. Everything around them, as if he was still ready to protect her from anything. When he saw her, his expression softened. The first thing Hana felt was safety. The second was her chest racing in a way it had never raced around him before. Jihoon walked toward her slowly. How are you? He asked, his voice gentle but loaded with concern. Better, she answered. They said I need to rest. That's all. Jihoon nodded slowly, but he didn't look away from her. Hana bit her lip briefly. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was full. Full of everything they had lived through. Full of everything they almost lost. Full of everything they still didn't know how to say, till Jihoon finally breathed in deeply, as if making a decision. Hana, he began, his voice low, about what happened out there in the forest. I don't want you to think it was just fear or adrenaline. She lifted her face, her eyes meeting his, dark, intense, sincere. I know it wasn't, she replied. Jihoon swallowed hard. He took one step forward, then another. Now he was way too close, too warm. When I thought I might lose you, he said, it tore me apart inside. I don't want to go back to working next to you pretending nothing changed. Hana felt her heart slam against her ribs. Jihoon, you don't have to pretend anything, she murmured. I felt it too. I was scared of losing you too. He raised his hand and touched her face, slowly, almost asking for permission. She closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into the touch. When she opened them again, he was even closer. Oh. So tell me, Jihoon asked, voice rough, what does this mean between us? Hana took a deep breath. The wind blew. The tent behind them swayed. And she finally admitted what had been burning inside her since the moment he caught her in that fall. It means, I want to see where this goes, with you. Jihoon's expression changed, softened, brightened. He slid his thumb along her cheek and leaned in, bringing their lips closer, slowly, like in those dramas that always pause right before the kiss. But Hana didn't pause. She lifted her hand, pressed it against his chest, and pulled him in. The kiss happened with the exact intensity they'd both been trying to avoid the whole time in the camp. It was warm, deep, full of everything they had hidden, feared, and wanted. Jihoon slipped his hand behind her neck, tilting her face. Hana ran her fingers along his torn shirt, feeling the heat of his skin beneath it. He let out a breath against her lips, pulling her closer. She sighed into his mouth, letting her body soften into the moment. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Hana was still in his arms. Jihoon, she murmured. Don't run from me again, he said, pressing his forehead to hers. Only if you don't run from me either. He let out a soft laugh, rare, almost shy, something she'd never heard from him before. I'm not leaving your side, he replied. Even if the whole world falls apart. Hana smiled, resting her forehead against his. Then I guess we have a deal. Lights appeared over the horizon, more teams arriving, more trucks, more order returning to the chaos. But there, in the middle of that chaos, Hana and Jihoon had found something they never expected. something they didn't ask for. Something born on the worst day and becoming the best thing. He held her hand. She intertwined her fingers with his, and together they walked toward the illuminated camp. Not as coworkers, not as survivors, but as something new, something strong, something neither of them was ready to name, that was already impossible to deny. The beginning of a love that awakened that night and had no way back. The end.